right. Hello, everyone. Welcome
Hey,
to another Morbid Symptoms podcast. I'm your host, Tara Van Dyke. Michelle, can you hear me?
I can hear you very well.
Cool. And I can hear you very well. So that's two
Right.
things down. Hello, everyone. Just let me get our live stream starting soon off the bottom because sometimes I forget that it's a bit like
So
not.
let me tweet that we've started.
Go ahead, tweet,
Right?
baby.
Uh,
Oh, my
or
hair's kind of
X.
crazy. It's all
I don't
right.
know how to say it. Yeah.
Let's see, banners. Hi, everybody. Just give us a second to get our ducks in a row. All right, so this looks good. Welcome to Morbid Symptoms. I'm your host, Tara Van Dyke. I'm here with Michel Bauwens, and we're going to be talking about, or he's going to be talking about a lot about Marxism or communism, or Marxism versus communism. And what he means by that, and we'll kind of an overarching meta question then would be: are these really opposed, or is this a semantic thing, or is this a generative tension going forward as we struggle to find our way through whatever is past capitalism? So let's see. There we go. All right. So hi. How are you doing?
Happy to talk to you. I'm doing well. Well, I should say I live in Chiang Mai, northern Thailand,
Mm-hmm.
which is plagued every year by the smoky season. You
Okay.
know, it's anywhere from 50 to 500 p.m. every day for 2, 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty bad. It shortens your life expectancy by 4 years over a lifetime,
Okay.
and you have a few thousand people in the hospital every year.
So the smoky
Um,
season, is this from something that's going on agriculturally, or is this from just other
yeah,
pollution?
there's two things. So one is the traditional slash and burn
Mm-hmm.
agriculture, which made sense when there are 400,000 people living in the forest, but not so much when you reach, 70 million people in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem for the farmers is when they do this, they get mushrooms and all kinds of stuff, and they make almost as much money in 2, 3 weeks than they do in the whole year with the normal crops.
Okay.
And then additionally, and that makes it really bad, is industrial corn production. And I don't know how many millions of tons of industrial maize has to be
Maize, yeah.
burned every year.
Mm-hmm.
And so the problem is if you want to change it, it's a class issue. You have to satisfy the farmers
Mm-hmm.
who'd be on the streets, if they lose so much income. And then you have to fight the influence of these big agro businesses, which have their own interest in maintaining this, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so it's kind of a stalemate between the complaining middle classes in the cities and the government, which doesn't seem to be able to or willing to really do anything about it. So it's
Mm-hmm.
getting worse every year.
Okay. Well,
So
maybe we
if you
can
can
mute.
afford it, you leave Thailand
Mm-hmm.
during those 3 months. I'm stuck here as like poor people in Thailand.
Not that that's funny, but yeah. Well, I don't know. We'll see if we can kind of harken back to this as maybe an illustration for this discussion that we're going, or this. I don't want to say discussion because I don't know how much I'll be able to add. I'll just be kind of, maybe devil's advocate or a interlocutor of some sorts. But in terms of what we mean, the distinction between Marxism and communism. But before that, why don't you go ahead and give our listeners? This is the third time you've been on our show. It's been a
Oh,
while. I don't know why. It wasn't
yeah, I
intentional.
know one
A
time, but
while.
okay, maybe 2 times possible.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So one was kind of in general about this commoning, this peer-to-peer um,
right,
potential industrial revolution or civilizational revolution, I think is what you would
right,
choose to call it. And also because you were canceled for the crime of
right,
sharing a Jordan Peterson clip on a left-leaning
right.
Facebook group because you thought he raised interesting questions, I think particularly towards young men. and this
Yeah,
was
yeah.
an unforgivable sin. Um,
Right.
anyway, and then we had
I'm still paying the price for it.
yeah, haven't
Yeah.
been pardoned. Um, and then the second time was a similar theme about is it time to make grand narratives great again on
Oh,
this.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was a what seems like a whole lifetime ago, but check that out.
Right.
Put on a red hat as one is wont to do during these times. The red hat triggers just the right people. Um, and now we're going to get into this. So if you could just, so if you just kind of a potted elevator bio of yourself, and then we'll get into what this
Right.
topic is
Well,
about.
you know, let me kind of maybe clarify my relationship to Marxism in my life.
Hmm.
Um, so, and I hope I didn't tell that the other time, but I come from a
All right.
very poor working class family. Both my parents went to school until 13. My mother was practically illiterate.
Mm,
Um, so when I was a child, we had a leaking roof in Brussels, which is not like living in Thailand. It's like cold and winter, and
mm,
so I had asthmatic bronchitis when I was 18 months old. So they had to take me away from my parents. And so things I remember is, having to eat my vomit, having like 3 centimeter long nails, being in a glass cage. Like I have horrible memories of, and of
mm,
course the feeling of abandonment, right? When like you don't understand it as a baby why you're taken away from your mother.
mhm.
So I was, a pretty traumatized child, and with kind of different issues that I had to deal with, like psychomotor issues, and I was so shy with girls when I was a
Yeah.
young boy and stuff like that. And
Well, you got
so,
over that, Michel.
right, well, well, I'm a happily married monogamous guy with
That's right.
four
That's right.
kids,
He's off the
and
market,
my
ladies
kids
and
are,
gents.
yeah, no,
Big
no, and
M's.
my four kids are so amazing. I wish more people did that, to be honest. But anyway, that's another question. Um, and so I was like, why is this? And oh yes, I should also tell you, I was hyper empathic, diagnosed as hyper empathic, which so it's kind of like your ego boundary is not strong enough, and so you kind of feel everybody else is suffering.
Mm,
And I would have pains like in my liver, and then the next day I would learn that, oh, that guy has liver cancer, and I don't know how that works, but I had these physical ailments that after meeting people, right? So
mm,
I couldn't defend myself appropriately enough against like the outside.
mm,
And so for all of this, I was hypersensitive to human suffering. And when I discovered Marxism at 14, it was like, yes, that
mm,
explains it. That was for me. And so it allowed me to rethink everything, to reposition myself towards everything, because I
mm.
thought this is like a total theory of life and everything. And you may not like the following part,
That's
from what I can gather of your own affiliation. But yeah,
people
I
project.
became a Trotsky.
People project so much
Yeah.
onto me. I love it. It's like, yeah. Go
I
ahead.
probably do. Yeah, yeah, I probably do. So basically, I became part of a Trotskyist movement, with Ted Grant in England. So at the
Mm,
time, they had a majority in the Labour Party, Young Socialists. They had a big
mm,
mass party in Sri Lanka.
mm,
And I think they're now like the dominant faction. They're the only ones that survived. And they were workerists, which I really liked because I felt very connected to the working class.
mm,
So that's how I started. Did that for about 7 years, and I got an accident. I was 3 months in the hospital, and none of my comrades came to visit me, and that was a real shock because
mm,
I had given my life to this. 5 o'clock in the morning, I was distributing leaflets in the car
mm,
factory, Renault, around Brussels.
mm,
So I said, like, what is this? And so that was a bit of a crisis for me, and said, you're like, how can you love humanity, abstractly, but then like
mm,
when one of your comrades something happens to them, like you're too busy to care.
mm,
And I was, and and then also like the kind of life you have as an activist is very problematic.
Mm,
You so of course I was already enraged at the time. I was a rebel, and I was
mm,
unhappy with the world as it was. But that kind of like attitude of an activist is it has certain issues with it that make it difficult to have a balanced life, I would say.
yeah, yeah.
um, and so then I decided, okay, if I can't change the world, and remember, this was the 80s, so I had my Trotskyist friends saying, "Oh, the revolution is around the corner. It's around the corner. It's around the corner."
Mm,
And but what you're seeing is like, no, it's Reagan is winning, Thatcher is winning. You know,
mhm.
the students are more right wing than the professors now in the 80s. Like something, this is like
So basically,
the
they're convincing you or convincing themselves that the horizon, the communist horizon, is getting
yeah,
closer and
both, I
closer,
guess.
and you're like,
No, I
no,
think
it's
there's
getting
sincere.
further. It's getting further and further
Yeah,
away.
I think
Yeah.
sincere, and then as much I appreciate Trotskyism for certain of its aspects, as much I think now that if you look after World War II, they were basically wrong about everything. They predicted a political revolution in Eastern Europe, a workers' revolution in Western Europe. None of these predictions came through. So they were,
And
uh,
I'd be remiss if I didn't echo friend of the show, Alexander McKay, saying that Trotskyists tend to really be behind every imperialist policy for some reason.
yeah.
Um,
I'm
that's a
not sure I
side note.
agree with that, but
Yeah,
that's
but I'm
another
just saying that's what
discussion.
he.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what that.
But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I've listened to some of your conversations with him, and I appreciate
Hmm.
intelligent people thinking systematically about things. So I appreciate that you do
Hmm.
that. But I probably don't agree with that part of the assessment. But anyway,
Well,
of course,
but Michelle,
and
let's
yeah,
put a note in that, and we'll circle back to that if we have time. So I think that's important
yeah,
because my historical knowledge of Trotsky, its associations, is
yeah.
I don't claim to be any kind of expert on that. So
No,
if we
no.
have time to
I
circle
think
back to that, we
the
will.
truth of it, yeah, the truth of it for me is that, of course, a lot of the neocons and the Western elites eventually came from that branch. But I have an explanation for this. And the
Mhm,
same thing happened in Thailand. And let me explain how this worked. So in
mhm,
the 70s, you have a guerrilla in Thailand, just as you had in the whole Southeast Asian region, right? And then the king and the marshal, who was the prime minister, I forgot his name. They made a deal with the Communist Party of Thailand,
mhm,
and basically hired half of them into the royal foundations, which do like organic food, healthy agriculture, and they're like co-ops in a way, right?
mhm,
So these are not Trotskyists. They're actually technically more like Stalinists,
mhm,
because they follow the maybe the Maoist line.
mhm,
But I'm just saying the reason they do this is because in a society like Thailand and even in Europe at the time, being a Marxist organizer was an enormously efficient school to think tactically and strategically.
mhm,
And so, for example, one of the things I still miss that, right? I would like to recreate that, but I haven't succeeded. So we had every 2 weeks we had a meeting, and it
mhm,
was analysis of the world situation, analysis of the local situation.
mhm.
If you do that every other week, for years and years,
Becomes
like
habit. Yeah.
you have this kind of sense of like leverage points and balance of forces, and I feel I still have that. And I look back at my own predictions of like, for example, what's happening now with Trump and everything,
Mhm,
and Ukraine. I can tell you 4 or 5 years ago, I was predicting this, like,
mhm,
not because I'm a genius, just because I have this training of looking at certain
mhm.
signs, that,
And
and
carrying it
I think
forward.
that,
Yeah.
so I think the reason why so many Trotskyists were eventually turning up in the neocon camp
Mhm,
eventually is also because of that. They, once they decided that Stalin was the enemy, right, then it becomes logical that the enemy
enemy.
of your enemy is your friend, and then
Mhm,
they eventually join the ruling class,
mhm,
or the managerial class. And I think that and maybe that even happened to me in a way, because that's a critique I would accept.
mhm. It's kind of
Once
funny,
once
you
you
know the
abandon,
HR term, the term transferable skills.
right,
It's like,
Yeah. So
it's
yeah,
that
yeah, but
the
and
skills you
so I
learn
just want to say
as
that once
whatever,
you
yeah, are
abandon,
transferable.
sorry,
And
yeah, so once you abandon the belief that it is the working class that will, be the next stage of history,
mm,
then you have to start thinking differently. And so that is actually the bridge to my thinking about the commoning and the
okay.
commons in a way, right? So so to make a long story short, so I abandoned like radical Marxism, not in a rational way, but in an emotional way after 7 years of militancy. And then I thought, okay, if I can't change the world,
Mm,
and I'm not happy in this world, then I have to change myself. And so I became a long journey. So I went to all the human potential stuff, from the 70s and 80s. I've been to Echelon, and I was with Rajneesh. I was in Rajneeshpuram in Oregon. If you've seen the famous
oh, yeah,
documentary
I'm
about,
aware. Yeah,
I
yeah.
was there. I was
Hmm.
there.
Hmm.
So I've done a lot of crazy stuff in my, I've been a Mason, I've been a Templar, I've been a Rosicrucian. I was looking for the kind of
Huh.
inner path, right?
Well, keep an eye out for the
And so,
for the autobiography of pen people. That sounds good.
oh, I have one. I have one. It's on
Sorry.
it's on a Google Doc.
Good.
If you can
Well,
find a
okay.
publisher, it would be great. And people
Oh,
who've read it
well,
said it's fantastic
well, we'll look.
because I
I'll add that to
combine,
the. I'll add that to the video description, and we'll check that out.
yeah, I combine my life experience with my place in the history of thought.
Hmm.
I've somehow always been on the edge of what was happening at a particular epoch, and I think I still am even
Hmm.
today. Um, but okay, so
Communism.
when I was 30,
Hmm.
I took 3 years of self-study of Western philosophy, kind of reconciled with my own tradition,
Hmm.
and then started in the 19 startups. I did two internet startups, trained a lot of people in Belgium around internet in the 90s, became a director of strategy of a big telco in Belgium. Was kind of like in the top 15% in terms of earnings in my country.
Hmm.
And so I'd like to say that, if my ideas have any value, it's because I've bridged so many worlds, right? So
Hmm.
I've been in the headquarters of proletariat in a certain way, when
Hmm.
I was actually in the leading committees of this movement, and then
Hmm.
I was working with the top brass of British Petroleum and this telecom company. I worked with the Vatican. I've been to China. I've worked, I've seen government, I've seen big business, I've seen small business. I was an entrepreneur. I was linked to the working class,
Hmm.
worked with the union. Worked with the freelancers union. I've done many things and then, economics, spirituality, politics. There's few people
Hmm.
that, and of course, I don't claim this as a quality of my own. It's because I suffered that I was
Hmm.
looking for the truth. And so
Hmm.
I had to do this. I
Hmm.
was looking like, where's the
Oh,
solution, right?
yeah.
So this brings me then to 95, 2000, when I was saying like this system is not working. I kind of slowly came back to the idea like, how can we accept this? We're destroying the planet,
Hmm.
inequality is growing. And I was asking the question to myself, like, am I helping or solving these issues? And I thought, no, like
Hmm.
I'm not helping.
Hmm.
In this position in the telco, I'm not solving any of the global problems. And then I went through a 2 year sabbatical in
Hmm.
which I was reading the macro historians, Spengler, Toynbee, Sorokin, a whole lot of them.
Hmm.
Looked at cycles, and so then I decided, and this is what we talked about last time, how seed forms are the key to change, right?
Hmm.
And so maybe we should talk now about the difference between commons and communism
Hmm.
and Marxism, right?
Hmm.
So the first thing I want to say is the following. If you have lived in the 14th century, right, you would have faced two realities. One that was still very strong but declining, and another one that was weak but growing and emerging. And that was a declining feudal system where you have no money. You pay tribute. You give half of your production. So it's kind of a fairly monolith society.
Hmm.
With a church which is against usury, which actually meant making money with money.
Mm,
right? It didn't mean like high interest rate, just meant interest rates.
mm-hmm,
So against merchants, against mercantile activity.
mm-hmm,
Um, and of course, at the same time, you have the growth of the city economy in Italy and the Netherlands and the Hanseatic League. And and so bit by bit, the money economy becomes stronger than the declining feudal economy. What I'm trying to say here is you you can't analyze the 14th century if you have a theory of feudalism. That's what I'm trying to say. So
okay.
what I'm saying to you, and I know that's kind of provocative, but I really think that's true, is
Mm,
that you can't analyze what's happening now with a 19th century theory of capitalism.
yeah.
That that
I
doesn't
think
mean you
most
have
people
to
would
totally
agree. I
reject
think
it.
most people would agree with that, but which doesn't mean that they apply that. But yeah,
Right.
isn't that kind of the difference between like a what they would call a vulgar Marxism and a dialectical Marxism that's
Yeah.
dynamic and
Yeah.
tries to
I think
reassess.
the method is valid.
Mm,
And so the way I look at Marxism is the way I would look at psychoanalysis, which is, you can't unsee it, you can't unthink
mm,
it,
mm,
right? Because it opens up like a whole layer of reality which wasn't available, right? And
mm.
the way I think about epistemology is like if you can't make it into an object, you can't know it,
Yeah, and I
right?
would say, Michel, I don't know if this is. I don't want to. I don't know if this has anything to do with what you just said, but I remember that if it wasn't that that also Marxism and psychoanalysis are a product of capitalism. You wouldn't
Yeah,
have had
yeah.
so
In
it's
a
I
way
think
they
that
are,
also
right? Yeah,
that there's which means there could be kind of an endpoint, or there, at least there should be
right.
an endpoint, unless it just becomes
Yeah,
cynical and
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
That
Right. And so, okay,
that the issue.
so here's my
Yeah, go
conclusion.
ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I agree. And so
yeah.
my conclusion is we are now in a similar situation. So we have capitalism, it's still there, it's even still changing, into what cloud capitalism or what I call Netanyahu capitalism.
Mm-hmm,
Yes, that's absolutely true. But I also think at the same time something is growing within it, which is already post-capitalist or which
mm-hmm.
points to a post-capitalist future. And that is what I call the contributive economy.
Okay, and this
That
is what
is
you want to say. If I want, I don't want to put words in your mouth. That the established, or maybe to taken as a given coordinates or concepts of Marxism aren't up to the task of seeing what you see, what's already pregnant within the system that we have right now. Is that what you're trying to perhaps
Yeah, I think
articulate?
I would say that. Yeah,
Okay.
yes. Um, so the way I see it is that, uh, I see history as a history of coordination elites. And, the way you coordinate a society determines the way the surplus is created and distributed.
Mm,
So, for example, I think you can say World War One was a struggle between empires and nation states,
mm,
and the Ottoman, Russian, Austro-Hungarian Empire were eliminated, leaving the nation state as the sole surviving model. But
mm.
then within that, there was a struggle between fascism, what we call communism, and the the
Liberalism. Yeah.
Anglo-Saxon parliamentary system,
Mm,
right? And they were fighting it out, and that's World War II.
mm-hmm,
And then that eliminated fascism, and in 89, Soviet Union kind
mm.
of collapsed, right? Leaving like neoliberalism as the kind of
End of history. Yeah.
hegemonic order, right?
Yeah.
But so it's very important to see these struggles between coordination elites. And then, of course, what Marxism brought was the idea that the working class itself could be the coordination elite.
Mm,
And I think that failed. That is my position. So the
mm-hmm,
position is that the working class, didn't actually take power, or maybe it did for a short while, but
mm,
very quickly created its own managerial coordination elite.
mm-hmm,
And it survives in the China model.
mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you know Michael Hudson, and I
Yeah,
like
yeah,
his
yeah, yeah. He's the
analysis. Yeah,
OG. He's another OG. Yeah, original
yeah,
gangster. Yeah.
yeah. So, the idea that there is this like 5,000 year struggle between a East Eurasian model, which is
Mm,
state centric and keeps the market small and controlled, like the Mandarins ruled, not the merchants.
Mm-hmm.
And then a Western, Eurasian model in which the Greek private ruling class takes power,
Mm-hmm.
creates a counter-revolution, which is democracy. And from then on, the Western model is market-centric, conflict-based,
Mm-hmm.
with
Finance.
institutions
Yeah.
representing the working class, like the tribunate,
Mm-hmm.
etc. And that actually even through the Middle Ages, the classes are represented
Mm-hmm.
in assemblies. I have a book called Medieval Assemblies, which is very, very interesting. It shows that how these kind of ideas that there are different classes that have to make peace
Mm-hmm.
continues to exist even through the Middle Ages.
And you brought up Michael
Um,
Hudson because he
yeah,
makes a lot about debt and how
yeah,
even
I,
to
I
the fact
agree
that
with that, right?
that
Yes,
Jesus was anti-debt, and that
yeah,
somehow that's gotten totally inverted in what
totally
you would call
forget.
the
Yeah.
Western
So here's a
model.
theory, and you're probably familiar with it. So the basic idea is that in relatively static economies, which was the case until capitalism came around, there is technical progress, but it's like relatively slow, and it's subject to these cycles of
You have a lot of technological change, yeah, like
yeah. And
huge
so what
shift.
happens in such a society, the money is a representation of the decline of matter, right? So you have the temples,
Mm-hmm.
and they make ledgers that say how much rice there is in the temple. And of course, the rice gets bad, and that means the money has a negative interest rate.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the case until the 14th century, also in Europe, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the change can be precisely put with the extermination of the Qatar heresy in France, right? So they have Bracteaten money, and basically the way it works is you have 5 coins, and every 4 years you have to give it back, and you get 4 coins.
Mm-hmm.
So what that means is your money loses value, so you have to invest, and that's why those 3 centuries uh, in Europe were so high growth. A
Mm-hmm.
doubling of the population in Europe and a tripling in Western Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And that followed something that Marxists actually don't talk much about, but there was a real social revolution in 975, 1050.
Okay.
It was called the Peace of God movement.
Mm-hmm.
And what you have is the monks of Cluny with the farmers,
Mm-hmm.
faced with this total kind of chaos of the 10th century, where you have these predatory militias that steal gold from the churches, rape the women, which happens after the decline of the Charlemagne, the Carolingian Empire. Is kind of like a full feudalization of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And so they obtain three compromises: make love, not war. So it means that it means that
So
the
that wasn't
feudal
the
lord commits
60s?
to no, not the 60s, man.
Ten
This was
sixties,
way before. So basically,
1060.
the
Oh,
feudals,
I love it.
they promised to marry instead of fighting to expand their territory. So,
Mm,
so that kind of pacified internal struggle, right? And then you have the troubadours. That's like love becomes real, right? You have
mm,
the troubadours start singing about female love and all of that, right? So
mm.
then the second aspect is primogeniture, which sounds bad to our modern eyes, but that basically means the oldest son now gets everything.
Yeah.
So that means you don't have to fight amongst brothers.
Mm-hmm.
You know that the oldest gets everything. So the others either become clergy
Mm-hmm.
or they become restless. And that's why you have the Crusades, because now you have to get rid of this surplus
Of
of
men, yeah.
young men,
Mm,
right? And so, like, for example, the Mongols, you can trace back the Mongol expansion when they shift to primogeniture. Because
mm-hmm.
unfortunately, when you keep dividing up property amongst all children
Mm-hmm.
equally, you end up with very small plots of land, which are no longer
Yeah,
enough to
yeah.
feed a
And they're dealing with
family.
that in
And
India still to this day, actually.
yeah,
That
and Rwanda,
yeah,
a lot of people
yeah.
think that the civil war in Rwanda was a consequence of
Mm,
this,
mm-hmm.
uber fragmentation, right? So
Yeah.
then the third agreement was that the commoners no longer had the right to hunt for meat,
Mm-hmm.
And paradoxically, that created the conditions for a agricultural revolution because now they were more motivated to grow,
Mm.
grain, right? So by the time of the 12th century, you have this thriving high growth civilization in Europe
Mm.
where they have a 5-day working week, the Sunday and Blue Monday, the day of the family,
Oh.
where farmers have like from 100 to 120 holidays a year, religious festivals.
Mm.
Um, and that is what is destroyed when the Pope and the French king destroy southern France, right? And then they destroy that negative interest money, introduce usury money, positive interest money. And that means from now on you have to grow because
Mm.
otherwise you can't pay back your debts. And that
Mm.
creates the conditions for capitalism, right? And then what happens is if you're a landowner and you're outside of the money economy, you lose out. So
Yeah.
either you join,
Mm.
the emerging money class, or you get poorer and poorer. And
Mm-hmm.
then you have in England, was it Henry VIII, right, 13th century,
Mm-hmm.
who, the first enclosures were not in the 16th century, but in the 13th century, where he, nationalizes the land of the monastics, which is like about 1/3 of the country,
Mm.
and sells it to people in the cities, and that's the gentry, right? And that creates capitalist property instead of feudal property,
Okay.
and that creates, and I think we're in a similar situation where, so
Mm-hmm.
I believe that the commons is now the fundamental condition for stability and economic growth. So so and capital knows this already. This is why you have cloud capitalism, which
Mm-hmm.
uses and abuses
Mm-hmm.
peer-to-peer dynamics,
Mm-hmm.
and common knowledge, but exploits it in a predatory way. And then on the other side, you have commoners say, no, we don't want this predatory relation, and try to self-organize and keep the surplus in their own circuits. And so here's what I'm saying. That's important to Marxism, that the class struggle between workers and capital around industrial surplus value,
Mm-hmm.
which is still there, but is now being slowly being equaled by another struggle between commoners and cloud capital about the
Mm-hmm.
surplus value that is generated in common centric systems,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And are
And
the
so if
and you're the common centric systems that you're focused on are internet based, right? Peer to peer.
yeah, yeah, yes.
And are
So
there also
it's
like
a combination of physical
non-internet or
cooperation
analog ones?
and what I call cosmolocalization at the same
Mm-hmm.
time. So you have global commons. That means every innovation is available everywhere in your network,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have protocols of cooperation. You have new kinds of money, and all of that is creating new circuits of value.
Okay.
And within that, you have your own struggle between more capitalistic and less capitalistic ways of creating and distributing that value.
Mm-hmm.
But that is growing, you
Mm-hmm.
know, that is the part of the system that is growing. And within that, there is a contribution-based economy where you see that the new practices in open source, free software, crypto are all based on recognizing contributions and
Mm-hmm.
externalities, which is not the case in traditional capitalism, right? So just to make that clear,
Mm-hmm.
in the traditional system, you need a state for collective action. So
Mm-hmm.
you make profit within the industry,
Mm-hmm.
and then the state taxes the profit and redistributes it. But
Mm-hmm.
what you see happening in crypto is they tax themselves,
Mm-hmm.
give money to Gitcoin, and Gitcoin funds their own public goods, right? So they're doing collective action outside the state.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I'm not saying this is a perfect utopia, but it is happening, and it's
Mm-hmm.
creating new logics of value that we need to understand, and that a classical Marxist approach
We're not
would
pick
not
up
be
on
able
that
to say. Yeah.
or might
But
dismiss it.
this could work. I think
Because
my
there's a
guess is
lot,
very
there's quite a few
practical. It's not
Marxists who
bad.
think crypto is just like what do you call it? Like a pyramid scheme, a grift, like from
Oh yeah,
Bitcoin
yeah.
down. And of course
Yes,
there
but
are grifts and
that's not the
schemes, but
only thing that is happening, right? It's
Mhm.
like if you're in a feudal and you're the church and you see capitalism, you would also say, "Oh, this is very bad," but
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
still happening and it's still growing, right?
yeah.
So
Yeah.
but within that sphere, you would see that they're grifters and scammers, and then there are a lot of other people who are doing their best to create rules to avoid it out
Hmm.
of self-interest, but they're doing it.
Hmm.
They're saying, okay, we can't have that, right?
Yeah, we don't like it either. Yeah.
Yeah.
When everything goes down.
Yeah, and so I see. Then the big question is the commoners a class, right? That
Hmm.
would be a question.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, how
that
could
also
you, if
change.
you wanted to, are you saying that this can't, because we have, if we take historical materialism, which you could
Yeah,
separate it out from a political Marxism, yeah, their understanding of history. So you have the forces and relations that as things move on, come in conflict with each other, and at a certain point, you have kind of like this quantity quality shift, yeah, where the nascent becomes the dominant, or vice versa.
right.
Um, and so I think that you could use that kind of language. I'm not saying it's the best one to understand what's
Yeah,
going on. You
I
have
I
this,
think it's
but
very
in terms of,
valuable, and
go ahead.
yeah. So I do that all the time.
Mhm.
So I use a slightly different system, which comes from Ken Wilber, and it's called ACAL, all quadrants, all levels. And the basic idea is that every phenomenon in the world has individual and collective aspects, interior and exterior, right?
Mhm.
So you have the world of the eye, the evolution of subjectivity.
Mhm.
You have the world of the body, and how technology exteriorizes bodily functions.
Mhm.
You have the world of material systems and the world of cultural systems. And
Mhm.
so I would say that historical materialism and historical idealism
Mhm.
are both legitimate ways to look at evolution. And you can see that with Marxism, because there is a huge contradiction in Marxism, which is, yes, it's about historical materialism, but that Lenin, it's all about fighting for these ideas and organizing around these ideas, which
Mhm.
is a proof that, and I would say ideas are just as material
No, they can be
as
for sure.
other as other like they have real effects in the world. And
Mhm.
so I think we have to look at both,
Mhm.
the material basis, but probably
Mhm.
give more weight,
Mhm.
and so there is a Marxist that you might want to look at it, Benjamin Soriano,
Okay.
who has written from modes of production to the resurrection of the body. And it's a
Oh,
fascinating work, right? So he's
okay.
a real historical materialist, but he says you have to take religion seriously
Mhm.
because it shows you
Mhm.
the how conscience is organized at a particular moment,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, and I want to
And
just
so,
I just want to, because this is fascinating. I just want to put that in terms of, because whenever I think about materialism and idealism, I think, okay, there's some people that want to put the materialism ahead of the idealism, and some people who want to weight the other one. Whereas, I mean, of course, Marx himself, he was all about writing the books and the ideas and all this stuff. So it's the idea that turning Hegel on its head, and Hegel, I think also, and I'm God, I'm no Hegel expert because that's a whole language that's confusing to me. However, the ideal, or the essence has to come through the concrete. Yeah, it has to be particularized
yeah,
in some way, which is kind of
yeah,
like what you're saying is that,
I'm very much into that
yeah,
too. So,
yeah,
so,
yeah.
so one of the ways I reacted to my own Marxism and the kind of Marxist utopianism and idealism that I had was, by the time, so in 2000, I said, no, I have to look at seed forms, right?
Mhm,
I have to look at concrete seed forms. And so my method is very simple and probably not scientific, but, I say, first of all, empirics, right?
mhm.
Like respect for the facts. If the facts
Yeah,
contradict you, you have to be able to change your mind.
people that deal with it. Yeah,
It's very important. The second thing is just coherence. You can't say the sky is blue and the sky is red, in the same context, right? That
you can't
doesn't work.
say
So you have
woman
to
is
be coherent.
female and woman is male.
Yeah,
Sorry,
exactly. So you
I'm
need
not getting into
coherence.
that anyway.
Yeah, and then the third thing is the idea of emancipation. With what we know, what is the most mobilizing narrative that can make the world better than it is now,
Mhm,
and more distributed,
mhm, Mm.
etc., etc. So I
Well, you
still
have to
believe
give
in
you
that
have to give people
emancipatory.
direction, and you have to give them you have to reach them at a spiritual level as well, for lack of a better word.
Yes,
Yeah, and so
exactly.
you need a
Yeah,
good story, you need a good grand narrative,
yeah,
if you will, but not
yeah,
the trick is not getting so dogmatic and
yeah,
violent with
yeah.
it.
And so that's, I
Definitely.
think, the problem if you hold on to like classic Marxism today. I don't think you're in a very good position because, how to say this? I live in Asia, right, since 20 years. Like
Mhm.
the maybe 2% of Thai workers are unionized.
Mm,
Um, it's just not there. Like
mm,
even in China, there is this paradoxical survey that 70% of the French hate capitalism and 70% of the Chinese love capitalism, even though they
yeah.
live in a formerly communist country. And why is that? Well, as long as they believe that they can make progress, and even if they're exploited and work hard,
Mm,
as long as they believe their children will have it better than they have, there is a motivation there, right?
mm,
Um, and so what I feel is that the working class is it's no longer the factor that will be the primary factor in social
mm.
change. I don't have
Yeah,
that
that's
belief
fine.
anymore. In that way,
Mm.
I'm not in any way a classic Marxist.
And
That
so
doesn't
when
mean
you
I dismiss the working class, right? Because one of the things, why Trump is winning, of course, is that they respect their own working class more than the current,
mm,
cultural left who hates the working class.
mm,
So, working class is to be on
mm.
your side. That's, make that
Yeah.
clear.
Well, and also
Uh,
to ask you, because it's this idea that trying to figure out, like, if you wanted to use the proletariat, for example, which is a structural position, not so much an
yeah,
actual, the working, and it's
yeah,
also you get people who want to get in the weeds about that, like, well, is somebody working at McDonald's a productive worker? Is somebody, so it's the high idea that you had this quintessential when Marx was writing his stuff. It's quite clear. It's like you look at these factory workers,
yeah,
and and that and then he would, because he would say, people forget that's like, I'm gonna bring this into my analysis, I'm gonna push this out because I'm trying to clarify certain mechanisms or certain processes. Yeah. And through looking at the factory workers as the quintessential proletariat, it made a lot of things clear. Yeah. But then, of
yeah, yeah.
course,
No,
you
no,
bring in all the other
and I
stuff.
think it was fully
So again,
justified
so I
in
would ask
his
you that,
time.
even if you're not a Marxist, when we say the working class, like, who, I mean, if we can't just say, it wouldn't be very Marxist, I think, to say, or at least classically Marxist to say, anybody that has to sell their labor to somebody
Right,
else. I mean, that's one definition, but that's not a very productivist. That's not
right.
that's not who the dictatorship, the proletariat, would be. I don't think. So would you agree with that? Is that, and
So
that's part of the problem, I
I
think,
think
that
there
the
is,
clarification of
yeah,
that.
I think in Western countries there is a deep shift in class structure. Like it's probably less than that, but I remember even 20 years ago, the
Mm,
industrial working class, like in Belgium, was only 17% of the population,
mm,
right? And everybody else is, I mean, most of the people are working class in the sense that they have to sell their labor,
mhm,
but they're not industrial proletariats.
mhm,
And then gradually we got this precarization, right? Where more and more people do not have fixed jobs, they have projects, they change many times. Like
mhm,
I think now it's 13 jobs in a lifetime or something is the
mhm,
average,
mhm,
in Western countries. Like my father, it was one job in his lifetime. Like
mhm,
he worked 30, 40 years for the same company.
mhm.
That's
My
gone,
dad
right?
had
And then
two, and it
especially,
was only because my dad had two, and it was only because of Mount St.
yeah,
Helens that he lost his job at
right,
Weyerhaeuser, and then got
yeah,
another a different union job at
yeah,
a
yeah.
at a mill
But what is happening
at a
now
thing. But
is
yeah.
that most people are a lot of people are precarious,
Mhm,
are project based,
mhm,
and they're all connected through the internet, right? So if you're a precarious worker, the way you organize and or you make friends, it's through that new medium.
mhm,
And so for me, that means that somehow everybody's connected to the commons, whether they want it or not, whether they realize it or not, they're
mhm,
connected to the commons, right? But
mhm,
also if you're in the third world, the informal economy now, like all these people are connected.
Mm,
So I read this article in China about why, the wages went up so fast in China by a factor of 10, I believe,
mm,
in 20 years. And it's basically because working class people were looking at the wages at the coastal areas, and were choosing where to go based on the
mm,
information they had from the internet. So they were choosing the better paying jobs. So that
mhm,
had a huge effect, even without unions, had a
mhm,
huge effect on the power of the working class if they were connected themselves to the internet and ipso facto to shared knowledge.
mhm,
So I think the commons is really a general condition. It's
mhm,
not that exceptional as you may think. Whether you're conscious of it, that's
mhm,
exactly the same situation as what was his name, E.P. Thompson in The Origins of the British Working Class, right?
mhm.
English working class, I think it was called.
Yeah.
It took 200 years for people to realize they were workers.
Well, yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
they,
Well,
they saw
yeah.
themselves as people
Yeah.
who had left the
Mm,
countryside
mhm.
and were looking for jobs. They didn't see themselves as I'm the working class. It
No,
took a
no.
long while for that
Mhm,
consciousness to sink in.
mhm,
And so similarly, a lot of people don't realize that they're dealing with the commons, especially in the West. The commons have
mhm.
been totally, occluded. Like
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
doesn't exist as a category in human
Mhm,
thinking. And
mhm,
part of my job has been to bring that back, to make people think not in binary market states, but in this kind of tripartite ways of thinking. Like
mhm,
everything can be seen as a combination of state-centric, market-centric and common-centric
mhm,
potential solutions. You have a much broader imagination on how to
mhm,
organize things
mhm,
once you include the common. And the
mhm,
reason I'm common-centric but not a communist, right? Is I don't think everything should be a commons. I think
mhm,
we need a pluralistic commonwealth,
mhm.
but the commons is the preserving institution.
Okay.
Markets and states are extractive, they compete with each other, and they
Mhm,
compete by over
mhm,
extracting.
mhm,
And the commons historically has been the local community driven institution
mhm,
that protects the local community from that predatory pressure, so that
mhm,
you always have food locally through your local commons,
mhm.
right? And
Oh,
the
okay.
difference now,
So
of
this
course,
is,
is that
I
the
wonder,
commons became.
sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you because
Go ahead.
again, I'm just playing the devil's advocate here. I don't actually think that your argument is only semantic. I don't think that at all. But just kind of putting other people in my mind, because what you have because like you have the state-centric model, the market-centric model, which was dissolving now. We have all these problems because it became too dominant, especially with finance, and you have a mismatch of the political territoriality with the market territoriality and capital and all of that, that's causing all kinds of
Right.
destabilizing things, especially with the state and with the commons, what you would call the commons. And so, but if I think back about my historical materialism, is that they have this, at least they projected, it might just be a thought experiment, yeah, that you had the primordial or primitive commune, yeah, and then we're going in
Yeah.
this long circle, and we're going to get back to that at a higher level of development, which could be what
Yeah.
you're calling an order where the commons is not being debased and
Exactly. Yeah.
marginalized
And
and
in
whatnot.
that's a
But
similarity
it
with the
doesn't mean that
Marxist
the other
view,
stuff
right?
is out of it. We still need some
Yeah.
sort of,
Yeah.
political structure. We still need some sort of coordination and centralization. You want markets.
Absolutely.
So is that a fair
Yeah.
um,
So
yeah
my view is,
analogy?
if you look at the history of global regulation,
Mm,
so indigenous people don't have separate institutions.
mm,
They sacralize nature, and so you don't touch that, you don't touch that, because the
mm.
god is there, and we can't touch it for this and
They're
this
not
and
as
this
fragmented.
reason, right? Then once you have empire, you have extraction, but the commons is always there. So the monarchies and empires respect the commons as a kind of like welfare state-ish,
Mm,
balance to their extraction.
mm,
So that means that when there's hunger, there's always
mm,
like somewhere the local people can go to get
mm,
fed,
mm.
and the system recognizes that. Um,
Yeah.
Only capitalism encloses the commons. believes private is better than the commons, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then what you get is the state regulates the market. And that's what Polanyi is about, right? Lib lab.
Mm-hmm.
Every 30 years, the bound goes out of bounds, and then there is like a recheck,
The
either
counter,
through
yeah.
more market or less
Counter
market, more
movement.
regulation, less
Yeah.
regulation. And so then the contention is that stopped working in 1980s
Mm-hmm.
because national finance got stronger than the nation state.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Broke
there's
away
nothing
from.
you can do within the nation state to change that fundamental because the balance of forces is not there.
Mm-hmm.
So then here's the solution. Either you say we need to inflate the state again, but at a world level. So we need a world state,
Nationalism. Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Or and or you need to inflate the commons. That's my view, right?
Mm-hmm.
So certainly not inflate the market on a
Yeah.
global level
Yeah.
because that's like the death.
Yeah.
That's like
That's what we need to
suicide.
tame. That needs to be
But
tamed. Yeah.
exactly. But the world state, I don't think that's very attractive either. And
No.
so, can we imagine new types of multi stakeholder institutions that are common centric, but with the people? And this is very different. So, I see the struggle today is between neo sovereignists,
Mm-hmm.
the old East Eurasian model, which
Mm-hmm.
is Russia and China now. And so, the way I say it is you can't be an oligarch in Russia and China without the approval of the state.
Mm-hmm.
And in the West, you can't be president without the approval of the oligarchy. So it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
kind of like the polarity is slightly inverted, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's the global struggle between the West and the rest. And then internally in the West, between the globalist and the national
Mm-hmm.
populist, is the same struggle. The national populists want to bring back more nation states again. And
Yeah.
that's why, there is
Kick out the
sympathy.
immigrants.
That's
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why there is sympathy between the national populists and the kind of neo-sovereignists. Why Trump and Putin understand each other
Mm-hmm.
because they have a similar idea
Mm-hmm.
of around the state.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and but these are both extractive and competitive institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say one more thing. The market-centric view, I think that's what Davos is about, is global multi-stakeholder alliances, but led by finance with weak nation-state and approved NGOs, but without the people.
Mm-hmm.
Because at least in the nation-state, you have popular sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
And that completely disappears in the Davos system, right?
Mm.
And that's why it's so anti-democratic.
They spend a lot of time
And in
getting
that sense,
around it, but not say, but in word and using words that seem like they're not getting around it.
yeah.
Yeah.
But basically, they hate the people. I
No,
mean,
the
that's why
people
they're
are the
losing
people
because
yeah.
they hate their own people,
Yeah, which is why they
or
spend so
they're
much time.
detached.
Which is why they spend so
Yeah,
much time trying to manipulate and manufacture consent, because they still have to
yeah,
care about what we think, um,
yes,
to a certain degree.
and it's
Yeah,
not working anymore, and that's their problem,
seems
right?
like it.
And that's why the national populists are winning.
Mm.
Um, okay.
Although, as a side
Anyway,
note, what
and
do you
so I
think
see the
about
commons
who
as
won
a
in
third way,
Germany?
right?
The BlackRock dude won in Germany. Yeah, he's a
Oh
conservative
yeah,
party.
yeah,
He was like
yeah,
a BlackRock dude. I don't know
yeah,
what's going on in Germany. Anyway.
yeah. So I think there's a global civil war.
Mm.
Um, And I think the Western Empire, and maybe you will agree with this, has become woke. So woke is an essential ingredient of the imperial rule today. Um, and then you have a counter reaction, which is like the more comprador bourgeoisie, as we used to say, like the those that are still related to their territory in some way, small businesses and rural people and working class
Mm-hmm.
people, and these are the two alliances fighting it out. And I think there is a lead regime change
Mm-hmm.
taking place right now. I think Trump is a Bolshevik, not from the
Oh,
same
well,
side,
explain how you. I'm assuming you're using that as a metaphor,
in the
or not.
sense that they are now totally committed to a deep political revolution. I think Trump is Roosevelt, not of course in the same way. They changed in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's a total reorganization. It's like the last ditch effort of American empire to remain significant.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, I think in that framework, they are more right than the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So reindustrialization, abandoning the cost of empire. Um, so all these things make, regulated migration,
Mm-hmm.
focus on families.
Mm-hmm.
These things make sense in a dying empire. I'm not
Yeah.
saying it's gonna be successful,
Mm-hmm.
but the other side is just continuing what they're doing. That we
More of
know
the
that
same.
will not work, right?
Yeah.
So, I see it as a class alliance, right? And I think this is so.
Mm-hmm.
I see. Okay, I'll give you three rules which I believe in. One is slaves never win, and if they win, they repeat domination. The Mamluks, you know,
Mm-hmm.
they just recreated this. They made other people slaves and
Mm-hmm.
they were slaves who won, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then even Russia, I think eventually, another elite started managing the system.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying it has no legitimacy, but I think, uh, I mean, that's my analysis. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so I think what wins is jurisdictional alliances that can be regenerative or degenerative.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're interested, there's a great book by Mark Whitaker where he looks at ancient China, ancient medieval Japan, and post-Roman Europe, and he shows you how that works, how different alliances are made between the people, the middle classes, and the top.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of more trialectics than dialectics in his language.
Mm-hmm.
And he says very often is the top mobilizes the bottom against the middle, right? So the king allies with the city people against the aristocracy.
Mm-hmm.
And the paradox is that creates more centralization, right? So
Yeah.
it's done in the name of democracy, but it
Mm-hmm.
actually creates a more uniform, centralized
Yeah.
system
Yeah.
than,
Authority.
let's say, a feudal aristocracy, decentralized system.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that, like 2020, right? You see the Biden and Kamala funding people who are burning the cities, right? So they're
Mm-hmm.
mobilizing part
Yeah.
of the bottom against,
Mm-hmm.
the other faction that they don't like.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this
Well,
is
and you
a
also
good
have on
way
the
to
other
look at it.
side, how would that be with on the other side? You have the kind of the flanking of like the NGOs and the kind of PMC types of organizations that also present themselves as being, like non-governmental or non-market, but actually
Right.
typically flank state market projects or one against the other. So you have that as well.
So Earl,
Yeah.
so Earl Thompson has a really interesting essay and book. I can't remember the title. It's in my wiki. I can send it to you later.
Yeah.
So his idea is, okay, you have the ruling class, the 1%,
Mm-hmm.
and you have the managerial class. The managerial class is subject to internal ideological competition, but it's the ruling class who decides which faction to fund. So, for
Yeah.
example, after World War II, the working class has been fighting for their nation. Sometimes they come back with their guns, like in Italy and France.
Mm-hmm.
So you need Keynesianism. You need social peace, a new social contract, more welfare.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they will go. And Russia is there as a big
Mm-hmm.
competitor and an
Civil rights.
alternative model, right? So then in '73,
Mm-hmm.
you have the oil crisis and the Keynesian stuff. They tried, but it doesn't seem to work. So they do their funding, but you get hyperinflation.
Mm-hmm.
And then they start funding a very small group, 15 people of the Mount Pelerin Society, right? And that becomes a neoliberal think tank ecology
Mm-hmm.
that brings Thatcher and Reagan to power,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then in 2011, with Occupy, there's a panic because now it's a 99% against the 1%, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so and when they see a small group of people denouncing Sanders as a white supremacist,
Mm-hmm.
and the nation, the new
Sexist.
Republican democracy now
Mm-hmm.
echo that, which is like insane.
Tallahassee coats.
Uh, yeah, and that's
Mm-hmm.
what Vivek talks about in Woke Inc. He says
Mm-hmm.
that his colleagues all understood this is what we need to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, they started funding the woke faction,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what I lived through. Is that at some point,
Collateral
if you were not
damage. Yeah.
woke, you don't get a penny.
Yeah.
And that's what Trump is destroying, right?
Mhm.
This is the enemy faction, the other faction of the ruling class.
Yeah, he wants to bring in a different
So he
one.
cut their funding, right?
Mhm.
But I think there's something deeper going on, right? The West is losing its control of surplus value,
Mhm.
right? Because we used to be 60% of world economy. I think we are down to 26, and it's
Mhm.
going down. So as the amount of surplus extraction diminishes, because it's going to, the rest,
Mhm.
our capacity to fund a surplus class
Mhm.
is diminishing, right?
Mhm.
So they're defunding the symbolic capitalist
Mhm.
class, the PMCs.
Mhm.
We'll see what they do with the working class. I think that's the struggle between Bannon and Musk, where
Mhm.
where Bannon is saying, no, you have to protect the working class, don't touch Medicaid, don't. But
Mhm.
I think Musk
The
is
whole
winning.
visa and what the whole
So
visa
that's
thing.
that's the
Yeah.
class struggle within the MAGA coalition, right?
Mhm.
Where you have the tech bros of Musk and Thiel, you have the MAGA, and you have the MAHA. These
Yeah.
are like three different sensibilities,
Mhm.
and Trump is like a Caesar trying to maintain the
Yeah.
balance between those
Yeah.
factions, right?
Yeah.
So
And
you
they're
can
fighting
go
with each
different
other
ways.
because it seems like you always know whoever's having the most fun or most McDonald's lunches with Trump in the plane, you know that he or she is the one that has his ear that week. So for a while it was Bobby
Yeah,
Kennedy was with, or Bobby Kennedy Jr. And now Elon Musk and him are like thick as thieves. So we'll
yeah,
see.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I wanted to ask
So
you because in terms of this, because you must be familiar with the Manhattan Institute, yeah? That's where Mark
yeah,
Ruffo works, and also Colin Wright went
Christopher
there, and
Rufo, Christopher Rufo.
Chris
Yeah,
Rufo. Sorry, yeah. And
right.
so, but they also have this issue because now they have. I think they actually have a trans someone who says they're trans on their staff. But it's kind of, there's this idea that you have like the white, like not the white. That's a Freudian slip, although they're mostly white. A right woke, primarily around
Right,
Israel, and
right.
that type of thing. So you have, I don't know what's going to happen because but if it's just going to be really trying to weed out this kind of shadowy, and what I mean shadowy is they say they're non-governmental or non-market, but they actually are bolstering or flanking one or the other or both. If there's going to be a weeding out of this kind of third sector crap misnomer, or if it's just going to be get out the woke, the traditional woke, but then we're going to have Manhattan Institute people telling us, what's
Yeah,
right and what's
I'm very
wrong.
pessimistic about, the progressive side. I,
Mm-hmm,
I think we are at the end of an arc, right? So the the 1968 arc, so you have the young boomers, the future
mm-hmm,
boomers, protest against the 50s system. Politically they don't win, but then they get jobs in all the institutions, they
mm-hmm,
gradually take over,
mm-hmm,
and and install that progressive cultural agenda, and then
mm-hmm.
somehow they go crazy with woke. It kind of
Yeah.
flips in a weird way, and it
They jump the
becomes the
shark.
opposite.
Yeah.
It becomes the opposite of what it was,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that is going nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
I think
no.
the problem is very deeply sociological. It's not something you can solve.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see it today, right? Is making peace, and they're all in a panic.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, the w- the to see that the so-called left is now pro censorship, pro war, pro genital mutilation.
Pro CIA,
Uh, it's
FBI,
pro CIA, pro
all of it.
USA.
Yeah.
I mean, all of it. It's
Mhm,
like it flipped, and
mhm,
now is the right wing is using the language of what used to be the left,
mhm,
and critiquing pharma, and
mhm.
like it's. But I think it's
Some of them,
sociological.
yeah.
It's
Mhm,
they know that they're losing,
mhm,
and so they're attaching themselves more and more to the
mhm,
financial class.
mhm.
But I think the tide is turning.
Yeah,
I think you cannot rule against your own people,
not for too
and
long,
that's
no.
what they've done. That's
Mhm.
hmm?
Not for too long. Not in a place like
for
not
some
in a place
time,
with the
right?
cult
You
with
can
the
you can
with the
fool
culture like the United States. You can't
you can fool
very
some of
long.
the people all the time. You can fool all the people some of the time. You can't
Mm-hmm.
fool all the people all the time. And I
Mm-hmm.
think this is the end of this arc.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying the other side is the solution,
Mm-hmm.
because they deny ecological realities and many things that are problematic in my view.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but they're
Well,
gonna have room to try
mm-hmm.
their solution out. And I think the class struggle is taking place within that new coalition, not
Mm-hmm.
through the left versus the right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's my opinion.
that's also an antiquated thing, because I wanted to mention this earlier, and this has come up several times. I think, and the other times we've talked, a theme is to remember that there's a lag between concepts and what in reality, or what's going on concretely.
Right.
The concepts are always going to lag. So we go through a phase where there's a mismatch with the concepts that have been established or solidified. The owl Minerva flies at dusk, whatever. And we're always there's always this retroactive type of thing. And so with all the other stuff that's going on, there's this confusion about, what concepts still work. Can we just retool them? What do we need to totally retire to kind of get a grasp on what's going on, which of course is important for political or any kind of work. So I agree there. And I don't know, because I was also thinking if Trump is to use Trump as a master signifier. I've been thinking a lot about, as you know, psychoanalysis lately with my my tough love of the patriarchy feminists. Tough love, ladies. And that you have now the negation of this woke craziness, but we don't know what the negation is going to be, which would be a more solid, concrete configuration, I think. And so
I think
who knows?
it has to solve three issues. So the first issue is a balance with nature. So I think we need a new contract between nature and humanity. Like a deeper understanding of the interdependence of life. We can't kill the bees and the worms and exhaust the land.
We have
There's a limit
bodies.
there, right? So that's one. Second, social justice in a real sense, like you have to take care of the whole population somehow.
Mm-hmm.
You can't continue immiserating people indefinitely.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third is, I think, global governance in some way or other. How do we solve conflict in this interconnected world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think the international system is not good enough. We need a transnational kind of shift. So,
Mm-hmm.
but those three are, like, for me, the guiding lights of, like, and it probably, so if you read some of these macro historians, what you see is that change happens through bifurcations,
Mm-hmm.
right? In other words, like, there is at some point a total rejection of the old world because it just doesn't work anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now we're still in the stage where most people want to double down on the old solutions, including the
Love
Trump
them or hate
kind
them.
of,
That's what's known.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's get back to the nation state. 19th century Monroe Doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's a
Mm-hmm.
normal reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
What do you think,
if
really
that
quickly?
doesn't
What do you
work,
think about the monarchists, like that Gavin? Who's that guy? The guy with the
Curtis Yarvin,
yeah. What do you?
uh,
He's a hoot to
he
watch.
probably
He's
will
kind
be.
of I don't know what's going on there, but I'm just like, okay, dude. But what do you think about that? Is that just
Um,
another reaction, another defense
okay, what do I think
mechanism?
about this?
Not
Um,
him, but the idea.
yeah, so I don't know if you remember these books like Pierre Clastre, Societies Without a State, right? So
Mhm.
what he describes is that in these relatively egalitarian societies, when there is war, there's always a war chief, right?
Mhm.
And for the duration of the battle, like, there is this kind of, like, temporary dictatorship, like a strategic and tactical direction.
Mhm.
When they come back, is a farmer again.
Mm.
And I read a book, I forgot about the Comanches, worked the same way, even in the
Okay.
18th century in the US.
Mm.
Um, and so there is a cost to democracy and to deliberation, right?
Mm.
You can only deliberate so much.
Mm.
And so what you see in open source, and people call it benevolent dictatorships, right? I was called that, and I was in a way when the P2P Foundation was functioning until I was cancelled in 2008, 18. It was working very well.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't actually I was not a dictator, but it's more like a constitutional monarch, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, somebody
so
has to make the
what
decisions. I mean, at a
Well,
certain point, somebody has
I
to
tell
make the
you
decision.
what is so interesting about open
Mm-hmm.
source, right? So in a kind of classical leftist mindset is we need to decide collectively, right? But there's still only one way to do it. Either we go left, either we go right, and we decide collectively.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is not how peer production and open source works.
Mm-hmm.
It's an open ecosystem. Anybody can permissionlessly contribute, can try out different things.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is a layer of either they're called maintainers, editors, whatever they're called. They cannot give you commands, but they can say yes or no. This
Mm-hmm.
is so they defend the integrity of the ecosystem,
Okay.
and it works very, very well
Mm-hmm.
for iterative improvement. So open sources are very good at like continuously innovating.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you are in a contractual situation with an outsider, it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't work. And then they need to like have project based,
Mm-hmm.
leadership based. And so that's how I see it.
Mm-hmm.
You need deliberation and all of that, but there's always a point where there are situations where you need to create a temporary hierarchy to
Mm-hmm.
get things done.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you keep that balance is problematic. And Curtis Yarvin, his model is really the enterprise. He says everything that works is a monarchy because, enterprises are monarchies, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have
Mm-hmm.
and they're efficient. Um, but I don't think it's a good solution for a society.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
Well, it's
difference,
always the
right?
question efficient at what, because you can say that
Yeah,
BlackRock's efficient, but it all depends on what your measure is. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the externalities. But I wanted to
So
ask you because I know because we're going at an hour and a half now. I don't know how much time you have to spend with us. Um,
another 15 minutes is okay.
okay, because I just wanted to ask because again, when you're saying is that to not say that class is irrelevant, but how do we think if someone wants to focus on the commons and commenting and thinks that what's gone on is that we've had a cycle of where the market has gained too much dominance, and
Right.
particularly around finance, capital, and whatnot, that has weakened not just the state aspect of it, but also has really torn through the commons, broadly understood, and that we need. And there's going to be, you see, at some point, something's going to have to. That there's rising that the commoning is going to be a central point for you. And so I was thinking also that this kind of, again, for parallel discussions, because it makes sense that if something's going on, that you're going to have different people who are picking up on it from different ways, from different points of views, concepts, whatever. And I'm sure you're probably familiar with Nancy Fraser. Maybe she wrote a book. What was it called? Cannibal Capitalism. Cannibal Capitalism. And she also had a book, I think it was in 2018, when she was talking about capitalism as an instituted structure. And she made a lot of things. She said a lot of things that are similar to what you said, that one of the things that she focused on with capitalism is that you had what used to be more of a whole has been bifurcated. So you have the polity, the economy. So you have humans from nature. You have the polity from the economy. You have social reproduction from other production, and all this type of stuff. And looking at how what she calls boundary struggles, which seems to be another way of getting what you're at, that you have the boundary between these things has been, again, you have the market, or particular parts of the market that have are taken too much, free riding, not acknowledging it, whatever. And so her argument was that where Marx traditionally had said the hidden abode of capitalism, of value, is production, she wants to say, well, there's a whole other hidden abode around that, around people producing goods and services in the factory. There's this whole other thing, which you would call the commons, that is the seedbed for that. And if you don't acknowledge it, and if you get really ravenous, that's where she gets this thing about, that you start eating your own tail.
Yeah, because the capital doesn't recognize contributions, right? Both positive and negative. So I make this kind of quadrant: positive and negative social and ecological contributions. So they don't fund care work, at home, women's work, not funded, right? And they don't take into account destruction of ecological value.
Anything that doesn't have a price is out.
Exactly. And for 400 years they've done it, and now we have like a permanent overshoot. And so it seems to me logical that we have to bring that back in our decision making and calculations. And I think that one of the reasons I like what is happening around the blockchain and Web3 is that we now have a universal ledger, right? So once you have a universal ledger, you go out of the narcissistic accounting. So a state is only responsible for its own population, is not responsible for anything outside, and a corporation only looks at its own profit, not at anything outside. Once you have a universal ledger, you can put everything in relation to each other. Every transaction is related to everybody in the ecosystem. You can see it, and you can start to integrate contributions. So, and that is already happening in Web3. So they're funding the people working on their collective infrastructure outside of the market dynamics. They're already doing that, right? And then there are other people working on like thermodynamic flows, like where you can see. So we have 850 bioregions. You have 1,300 ecoregions. So that adds the marine ecoregions. You have 130 commodities. And you can actually visualize that flow, right? So theoretically, I mean, they're already doing it experimentally. You can imagine a world in which every collective entity actually has a vision of what it is doing. For example, Region Network has a planetary ledger that is linked to ecological state. So anything you do is reflected in ecological state. You have like 36 different metrics that tell you where you're improving or degrading the environment you work in, right? So, but to get there, that will be a value revolution. Just as this is why I was mentioning Ben Soriano, he shows that the resurrection of the body from the Christians was a real revolution, because the late pagans of antiquity, the body was a tomb of the soul, right? It was for the slaves do the work, the slaves don't count. But the proletarian Christians, they said ora et labora, work and pray. And the resurrection meant that the body is as valuable as the soul, because the body is also coming back at the end of time, right? And so he sees monastics as these highly integrated communities with farmers, craftspeople, intellectuals, and mystics in one community dedicated to the true, the beautiful, and the good, right? And they were like the regenerative institution within the declining Roman Empire, which became the basis of, restoring and restarting European civilization, right? And then in the 16th century, that vision is abandoned by capitalism. So you have salvific labor. I'm working to make the world a better place according to the divine plan. Becomes I sell my labor as a commodity, and it has no meaning anymore, right? So so this was a bifurcation, right? So the Christians
Mhm.
react to the
And in
Roman
exchange for
decadence.
meaning, you get enough money to live, I guess,
Yeah.
for the people who have to do the work that isn't really, meaningful.
And
Yes, aside from
mutualization
the
is the
fact that
key,
you get
right?
money at the end of it. Yeah.
Mutualization is the key.
Mm,
Is if you don't have a private ruling class, you can reinvest all the surplus in the system.
mm,
And that's why they were growing so fast. They say that the Christian monastic were as productive as the Byzantium, what you call it, the feudal, the imperial systems of
mm,
production. They were as or even more productive. And you can see in Italy within 100 years,
mm,
the monastics were always the richest in their region.
mm,
Like they were the middle class, right? Everybody has his own apartment. They're not living in huts.
mm,
They're living in stone apartments protecting from the weather.
mm,
Um, and mutualization means that you don't have to spend. Like the typical example is the drill. Right? A
mm,
typical drill in a U.S. family is used 8 minutes.
mm.
Why does everybody need a drill?
Yeah.
You can have
Yeah.
a tool library, right? You can have a tool library.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as society kind of faces these ecological
Mm.
issues, a return to
Well, and also kitchen stuff. This
mutualization.
is kind of funny, Michelle, because I was just thinking I was baking cookies with my girls the other day, and so I have to get out, the baking stuff that maybe you use twice a year or 3 times a year. And I was just thinking that, like, why do I have all this stuff that I use maybe once or twice a year,
Right.
and it's just kind of hanging
Yeah.
out in my bottom
So,
bin anyway.
let me introduce Olivier Amand. He has a book in English. He's a French biologist. And so
Mm,
he says, okay, so we live through an era of abundance and there is a norm and you can optimize for the
mhm,
norm. But there is a cost to it, but you don't see it because there is abundance. So
mhm,
as you enter an era of more scarce resources,
mm,
the norms start fluctuating. So he calls it l'écart type, the typical deviation from the norm becomes bigger and bigger, right?
mm,
So we are entering, he says, a 2-century cycle of disturbance.
mm,
So, instead of going like this, we're going to go like this, up and down. And so he says optimization no longer works. What we now need is resilience,
mhm,
robustesse in French, right?
mhm,
So instead of having one crop, which
mhm,
you optimize at any cost, like impoverishing your soul, etc., etc. Now you need to think in terms of resilience, more than one crop,
mhm,
like de-risking, right? Maybe one crop that is good for drought, another that is good for flooding, another that is good for this and for that. And so this is like requiring a whole rethink
mhm.
of society. And I don't think neither the market nor the state are the appropriate institutions that are going to do this.
Mm. All right. Well, on that note, always fascinating. If you have a few minutes, we have some comments we can go through and see if there's any
Yeah.
questions to you. But before we do that, I just want to kind of recap at least what I mean, I'll think about this later, but what I've currently retained from from listening to you is that you're advocating that it would be, rather than focusing on a capital versus labor or the bourgeois, the proletariat, that it's useful to think in terms of, for lack of a better word, market, state, common, or the commons,
Right.
and that from your analysis and the kind of macro longue durée histories that you've read, that people have focused on tipping points and transitions, that you think that we're coming out of a phase, or in the phase of where the market rule over the other two, as even as it was, is having all kinds of problems. The contradictions are becoming more than the system can bear. We have all these things coming out, and that you're focused on primarily in terms of the peer-to-peer and the internet peer-to-peer production or creation, innovation, whatever, saying that is one thing to look at about how we have, maybe hopefully, or maybe you'd say it has to at some point, but how difficult it is, a reestablishment, a reinvigoration, a re-acknowledgement of the significance of what you're calling the common. Yes, and that when from your history with Marxism, you think that it's perhaps a bit stuck at Lenin, and there's a need to also kind of bring that up to date, or maybe to be more ruthlessly critical with the framework that a lot of us want to hold on to. That maybe it's obscuring things that need to be that are.
Can I bring in Karatani
That's it.
in
That's
this? Right.
Yeah.
Let me just bring in Karatani, right? So remember, Karatani distinguishes mode A, gifting and commoning, which is dominant in tribal kinship-based societies. Mode B, which is state, extraction and redistribution. Mode C, which is the market. And he says, because we are genetically primed to live in convivial tribal associations, which is, what we did for hundreds of thousands of years, we humanity periodically tries to reestablish mode A at a higher level of complexity. And that's what he calls mode D. So first you have the world religions, which try to civilize the warriors, right? When we become secular in the 16th century, we go to mass social movements. So Marxism, socialism, anarchism, even liberals are all kind of like mass movements that have a secular utopia. It's they call it the horizontalization of the eschaton. So the future is now going to be better than the past if we do X, Y, and Z. So the vehicle for emancipation became mass social movements theorized by Marxism and others, right? I posit that the new form will be constructive networks, organized networks with commons. This is how we rebuild a new world. So not by reiterating mass movements from the industrial society, that time has passed, but by practically recreating communities that basically exhibit the very principles that they wish to bring in the world, right?
Okay.
And that the way to compete with Marxist states is by creating cosmo-local power. So basically, if you're a local regenerative outfit trying to heal and feed your family, locally, so you have a bioregional horizontality. You're in solidarity with all other bioregional actors, but you're vertically sustained. All the people doing the same thing in the world are sustained by an entangled commons in which they can invest in their collective infrastructure, but also attract capital that is compatible with these local values, right? And so outside of the market and state polarity struggle, you have like a third force which is growing, growing, growing. And when those two kind of like are exhausted, then that third force is basically what you need to turn to, just as at the end of the Roman Empire, you had to turn to the monastics to restore your society. And that actually happens in every dark age. In China, Japan, this is a very kind of like dependable pattern, right? And revolutions only come after that. So in other words, you wouldn't have capitalism if you didn't have capitalists that could grow 4 centuries in the free European cities and establish their hegemony. So the revolution only comes at the end if the old regime is not flexible enough to adapt. And then it's like a pressure cooker, you get a revolution.
Well, you could almost say there's two revolutions. There's the ones the concrete one, and then there's the kind of the formal or the ideal one where it's kind of conceptualized and kind of seen as such. Okay, so let's quickly go. I'm going to go through some of the comments and questions, and some of them are comments. I'm going to go, and let's see if there's anything you want to respond on. They took the time to comment, so I want to put it on the screen, unless it's a nasty one, and then I won't. Try, and don't worry, people. All the stuff that Michel mentioned, and also the few books that I mentioned, or the people, I'll put in the video description, and also add it to the X post, so people can refer to that at their leisure. So arcane eclectic, Trotskyites were consummate optimists for no good reason, intellectual revolutionaries, not practical ones. Let's see.
I agree.
Yeah.
In a way, right? Yes. I think that's Stalin, basically, whatever we judge him on, on some moral issues and people that died, but it was just like a realistic option. Okay, the world revolution is not following,
Mm-hmm.
so there's only one option, which is to survive nationally.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the Trotskyists didn't want to accept that, so they continue with the idea. But
Mm-hmm.
in my view, that kind of proletarian internationals died in 1914. When all the social democratic parties voted for the war,
Mm-hmm.
and they were followed by the workers, right? They choose their national identity over their,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't see any sign that it has changed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Charles says, curious, what can be considered the commons in the West? Air? I can't see the internet as being a commons in a practical sense.
So you have to distinguish things that are common from things that are commons. So commons is three criteria. It's a shared resource managed by a community or a group of stakeholders according to their own regulations. So it's a thing, it's a practice, and it's a governance. Air is in common, but is actually considered as a private good or an open access good, which is not a commons,
Mm-hmm.
right? People can pollute it and nobody can stop it. A commons defends itself. If it doesn't defend itself, it's not a commons.
Mm-hmm.
So air is not a commons. You can say it should be or it could be.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the Sky Trust idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's from Peter Bauwens. Is consider every human being has a right to fresh air.
Mm-hmm.
Those who overuse the air have to pay, and that money would go to the people who underuse the air.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be like a common
Mm-hmm.
scheme for air, but it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Air is not a commons.
So what you're saying is that I think is because what you're saying is that there's people who are using the technology and the capacity of the internet to establish commons.
Yes.
Particular
Yeah.
commons. It's plural.
Mutualization. The
Yeah.
commons is about mutualization.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I believe there are natural commons like the forests and the fisheries, and the mountain flanks in Switzerland, even today, that they're jointly managed by villages. Then you have social commons, the mutualization of risk by the working class, right? I think originally these were commons. They were statified in the welfare state, but in mutual insurances, these were all commons. They had lost their land, and so they mutualized their life's risk.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have knowledge commons. But what you have to remember, knowledge is embedded in your daily life, right? So you can use knowledge to organize yourself and to production differently.
Mm-hmm.
So you get kind of,
Yeah. Well, there's the
physical,
two
right?
types of knowledge.
Physical
Yeah,
and digital.
there's like know-how, like I know how to do something, and then I can have like
Yeah.
like I can pontificate about Lacan or something. I have that knowledge, and then I know
Right.
how I could actually I can bake a cake, I can change a diaper, I can type 80 words a minute, I can apply the psychoanalysis to patriarchal feminists. I can do these things. So like the not like
that's the biggest skill, I
in
guess.
French it's like savoir faire, and there's two different kinds. But yeah, for sure. Let's see. Sorry. Since the comment, Jenny Lynn, the woke right is even more cringe than the left one. Well, I don't know about that. They're cringe in different ways, I would say. But so far,
here's my point. Can I say
done
something about this?
Go ahead. Please go ahead.
So, as much as I object to, the woke right, which uses anti-Semitism in exactly the same way than the left has been using identity politics, but, not so many people are actually concerned with genocide. It's sad, but that's the reality. But the left, their wokeism is rejecting the majority of the population. So
Yeah.
I'm just saying, it's a lot worse on the left than it is on the right so far. Could change, but so far.
Yeah, they became evangelical. It's kind of these Puritan, like secular evangelicals or something. So that most of us, we don't think right about all these things, but they do. And yeah.
But anyway, you have to see polarization and fragmentation. It's not something that happens on the left or on the right. It's something that happens overall in our society. It affects everybody. And it's very hard not to go into that emotional logic.
Jenny Lynn's making a joke. We need to shut this boomer thing down until we can figure out what's going on.
They're done. They're done. It's done. They can't. They can't defend
the boomers,
themselves.
it's like, boomers, please take a seat. Although they own so much of the stuff, yeah. So as a group, I saw that. I don't know how that is globally, and I can't remember his name. He's a Scottish guy, but he's based in a U.S. university. I can't remember his name, but he did this thing about looking at the division of wealth by generations, and the boomers just still far and away, and they don't want to they don't want to sell their house. They don't want to they don't want to let go of this.
Yeah, but they're gonna die
at some point. Yeah. Yeah.
By the way, I'm born in 1958. I'm not sure I'm a boomer.
Oh, you might be at the end. You're a good
boomer,
Michel. You're a good boomer. There's and we're all cracked vessels. Yeah, we're all contradictory. Right. So let's see. Let's see here. Okay, let's see. No, blockchain does not scale. Even the proposed e-currency CBDC exchanges for China and Russia are moving to traditional DB. I don't know what that means. Backed ledgers. This will be you. I don't know.
I think, okay, so there are problematic things about the blockchain, but I just want to say there are more than one blockchain and a lot of systems built around the blockchain. So maybe they have 2% blockchain and everything. So what is important is open distributed ledgers, independently of the technology that implements them, right? So sometimes you say blockchain as a shortcut, but it's really about universal distributed ledgers. And there's other systems like Holochain. It's not yet very concrete, but theoretically they can scale. So that's
and Michel wasn't saying that these things are perfect or like a magic bullet. He's just saying, looking at what he's focused on in terms of the commons and this next likely rotation from this era of increased market dominance and degeneracy, you can almost say. This is where he's based and what he's focused on, because also he has the technical know-how. Yeah, but he never said this is perfect and we have it. We just have to get everybody to sign on. It's not what he's saying. And I don't know, because I'm limited at but I'm always curious about things that are so polarized in their reaction. So you have people like when it's Bitcoin and crypto, you have people who are like, this is, like you have the Max Kaisers, and then you have the people that go, it's all bullshit, it's all a scam, it's all whatever. And I'm like, well, something, who knows? Yeah. Anyway, Stalin was based. Yeah, we have a lot. I have the Marxist-Leninist contingent who I dig. Stalin knew how to actually get from A to B rather than just theoretical framework of how to get from A to B. Okay, they're talking to each other. Let's see, which is fine. I appreciate that. I'm just trying to see if there's anything related. Let's see. The Zionists literally want to codify the term anti-Semitism as anything which pertains to the criticism of Israel. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Michel is one of the good ones, lol. Okay, so Jenny does not consider you a bad boomer.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, and legally codified. And Charles says, thanks for the answer. So I think we've gone through, I picked out the questions. And also I think that for some reason on StreamYard, I don't see what's on X. But anyway, Michel, lovely. You're my favorite empath, yo. Anyway.
I worked a lot to be less empathic, to be honest, because you can't live like that. You have to have an ego boundary.
For sure. Yeah.
So unfortunately, but yeah. So I'm like J.D. Vance. I believe in expanding your circle of care, like take care of yourself, take care of your family, take care of your community, take care of your nation. If you love your nation, take care of the world, right? And so this is something I want to say, because this is one of the problems I think that the left has, right? It's so the problem of the right wing is they love their own,
Mm.
and they may have difficulty to extend their
To the
love
other,
to
yeah.
outsiders,
Mm.
right? And the left is often just the opposite. It's they love everyone, but they actually do not concretely love the people around them.
Yeah. Well, and they
And
think that love is never saying.
there's research on this, right? There's
Yeah,
research on this. For
yeah.
example, amazingly, but left people are more racist than right wing people. Like, how do you explain
Well,
that? You know,
well, I
it's
think
just a
only when
question.
those bad
Yeah,
only when those BIPOC people don't vote or act the way they should, and then they get seriously racist. But yeah, I think also the thing on the left, I don't know if it's the libertine left, or they have to, if there's a defense mechanism that they really zero in on, sexual minorities and proclivities. But they think that saying no is the worst thing you can say to somebody. And sometimes the best thing you can
right,
say to somebody is no. I mean, any parent
right.
knows this, or any good, well, good. I mean, not that I'm a mixed bag, but you know what I mean? It's like you can't say no to
Yeah,
anything. It's like you
yeah,
can't
yeah,
say no to guys who say they feel like a lady, being on the women's, volleyball team or something. You
yeah.
can't say no to that.
You know,
That's mean.
I'm a
Well,
2015 liberal in many ways, right?
mhm,
I'm for all the rights that we have since the 1960s. You're basically do what you want. My problem is like don't force me to think like you, because
mhm,
that's totalitarian. Once you say, look, this is how I feel about myself, and you have
mhm.
to agree with me or else, I'm sorry,
Well, and
that's
very practical
totalitarian.
matters. Don't
Like,
make my kids
yeah.
pretend that the non-binary boy on their soccer team is a girl when he's clearly not,
Right. Yeah,
and
but
tell
that's
me
what I
that's
mean,
heinous.
right? Like
You
they
know?
feel whatever the way they feel, and I'm okay with that. Just don't force other
Or
people
that Israel is
to
engaged in
join your
self-defense.
game. So I think that in many ways this trans thing is transhumanism and video
Mm,
games, right?
mm,
So you have a whole generation which is being educated in the virtual world where they're avatars and they have 1,000 lives,
mm,
and so they've become accustomed to the idea that you can be what you can be, right?
mm,
And then you have the whole transhumanist ideas, which tells you, oh, you can change your body the way any way you want it to be, right? And that fusion, I
mm.
think, has created like a break with reality. It's like,
Yeah,
you
Ubermensch,
know,
yeah.
yeah, that's
It's like,
unfortunate.
you can set your own values. Yeah. So let's see. So really quickly, I'm gonna go through the rest here. Okay, everybody, you can keep on commenting with each other, but Michel has to go, and I have to go have a cup of coffee, or I'm gonna, I only had one cup of coffee. Anyway, it's a long story. I thought we're starting at 10 and we're starting at 9, and he didn't even know we were doing this today. So, but we came brought together. Look how on it
Hey,
he is.
I can tell you the same, Tara. It wasn't in my agenda, and then I look at my ex and I see what.
Well, also
But
usually I
so,
confirm the night. Usually I
Sarah,
confirm the night
I'm such
before.
a big fan of yours because you're funny, you're smart, and
Flattery.
you mean
Flattery will
what
get
you
you
say,
everywhere,
and you
Michelle.
say what you mean. So, like, yeah, let's clone a few of you.
Oh, well, you too. Don't you think? Don't you think? Maybe at a slightly smaller size, but okay. So let's get through this. Jenny Land, I stand by my position on the woke right, even though the left ones are beyond atrocious. At least they alluded to weaponized things that actually exist. The right seeks to silence. Yeah, there's a lot of silencing and controlling well,
On
people
both
who say they're
sides.
left. I mean,
Yeah,
people
on
who
both
knows what
sides.
they
Yeah.
mean anymore. But it's cool. Yeah, a pox on both their houses. Okay. Yeah, anti-Semitism. Yeah, just don't force it on the rest of us. That's fine. Kobfan, don't know what the left is anymore. The left and right are way to the right for me. Yeah, well, it's also the left bourgeoisie and the right bourgeoisie. Yeah, so it's kind of the left and the right of what? The same thing. It's kind of also why the center is a fetish. That's a different story. Kobfan, you can thank the CIA for this. Okay. Khrushchev's speech. Okay. So, good discussion. I found some books to read from this. Okay, great. On that note, Charles, thank you, people, from the comments. I appreciate you watching it. I know that, when we're dealing with people from different parts of the world. We just have to do these live streams when we can. And they, people who, but I'm always glad, I always appreciate the comments. It's nice to have that interaction. So thank you very much, Michel. Bless.
Thank you. Appreciate your interest. And
I'm totally, I'm down with the commons. I'm down with commoning.
Okay.
And I understand. I think that this way of thinking about it is useful, and it should be put in discussion with.
I'd love to know how Alexander
brother
see this. That would be
discourses.
interesting to see from his more. I would love to see how your friend Alexander thinks about this.
Well, I will try to. I will try to. I will suggest to him that you guys should. Maybe you should have. I can have you both on my show, or he can have you on his. Because I'm sure he would have something to say on that, because he, of course, is he is our go-to Marxist-Leninist. He's he's very So we'll see what he has to. I think it'd be very interesting to hear your guys' discussion for sure. And he's also extremely well-read, and he's a cool dude. You're a cool dude, so you could be cool together, even if you don't land on the same spot.
Right. All right.
Oh, Jenny Lynn just said, who doesn't love a good three-way? Jenny Lynn. That's right. Spicy. Right. Intellectual. Yes. Okay, cool. Thank you very much, Michel. Anything you want to say before we sign off?
No, I'll just share some links with you. Well, just something I'm very happy about. My book has been translated into Chinese.
Okay.
And I'll be doing a tour in China in the summer. So I'm really, really happy with that. I'm doing my pivot to Asia. So,
aren't we all? Bye, Europe. Okay.
Yeah. Frankly, I watched the debates in France, and I want to cry. I just want to cry. The way the European elite is reacting. It's just like, oh God, peace is breaking out. Like, horrible. Peace is breaking out.
No, yeah. I mean, let's we have to not enough Ukrainians and Russians have died. Not enough has been wasted. Yeah, they're crazy. I don't know if it's a gambler's fallacy or if they really just get off on it, but that's another discussion.
No, I can tell you, I was talking to a friend who has good connections with the French military. And the way they're thinking, I believe what he says is we have to go to war with Russia fast before they recover from the Ukraine war. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is the way they're thinking.
Yeah, no, it's gruesome. They're ghouls.
Literally.
They're ghouls. Yeah.
In Holland, they're training the military on war with Russia right now. They have manuals. They have everything. This is the way they're thinking.
With their 5,000 troops, who knows? But on a funny note, Jenny Lynn, this is for you. She wants, can you find me a Chinese Chad husband while you're there? I need to get out of here ASAP.
I'll look around. I'm in touch with young Chinese, they're 20, 25. They're very bright. They're way more open-minded than students from the West. It's beautiful to see. It's beautiful to see
also,
that
Arcane
Chinese
Electric, maybe you have to find two. That's another. Talk about a commons. And one final thing. So far, my crushes on Red Note are taken. Yeah, it's hard. At least they're being honest about that. No catfishing. No catfishing on Red Note yet. Okay, Michel, thank you very much. Everybody, I'll put the links. Well, he'll share with me the links, and I'll try to put all the
we have trouble stopping.
Who are mentioned on there.
2 hours and is also, great. 2 hours. We did 2 hours. That's amazing.
Yeah, we did. And also, let's put anybody who know. I have a contact. I have access to Alexander. Anybody else who does, let's put the pressure on him for him and Michel to have a discussion.
All right.
Bye-bye. Thank you, friend. Bye-bye. See you. Dewey. All right. So another great episode. Yesterday, Taiwan with Zhongyu and Shongyu. I say his name like I'm bowing. It's crazy. Shongyu. And today we with Michel Bauwens on the commons and whatnot. So please do like, subscribe, share. It's a baby channel. I'm learning as I go, but I like it. So hopefully you guys see the potential here as well. If anyone has an idea for a guest or topic, etc., please do let me know. I'm open-minded about that. Or if you want to come on and hash something out with us, that's great. Let's see. I'm going to start the music for the outro. I usually forget that I'm sitting here like I am now with not much to say. But Michel is great. He didn't have his X thing on there, but it's at M Bauwens, all small letters, at M Bauwens. He's a very cool dude, as you can see. And on that note, please take care, and I will see you soon. Bye, everyone.